Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. The very first of Musonius Rufus's lectures that we have begins by saying that when there was a conversation or a discourse going on about this topic, here's what Musonius had to say about it. And what is the question? Well, proofs or demonstrations, apodeixis in the singular, apodeixes in the plural. And this is an important term, right? A proof or a demonstration is supposed to take some things that a person grants and then lead them to a conclusion that perhaps they were opposed to or perhaps they didn't understand, and now it's a reason for them to believe that to be the case. Musonius is also going to use the word logos or logoi, arguments, discourses, could also be explanations about a matter. And the question is, well, how many of these should we provide a person? And before we look at what Musonius is going to say, which is quite an interesting argument that he's putting forth, we should think about what he might be going up against, both in his time, and we have a lot of people like this in our own. Some people think that the more arguments or proofs or whatever you pile up, the more conclusive what you're saying is actually going to be. And we can see one example of this in the degeneration of debates into just regurgitating talking points, right? People think you throw a whole bunch of things at something and it will be convincing not only to the person who you're debating, but to the audience as well. And, Musonius is going to talk about medical treatment and exercise, but this can also pertain to philosophy as well. And he's talking about for beginners, for people who are just starting out. So he said, beginners must learn from their teachers of philosophy in gaining a mastery of whatever they're studying. And I do want to pause also on this term as well, katalepsin. So what that means is a really substantive grasp or understanding. The katalepsis is kind of a technical term among the Stoics. It means having genuine understanding or knowledge that's not going to be shaken about something. They talked about, certain appearances or impressions being kataleptike, and so we see this term being used here. If you want to translate it as mastery, that's fine. Really knowing what you're doing or talking about could be another way of referencing it as well. And so Musonius says there isn't any good point to seeking out a lot of proofs for each single thing, each pragma that you're going to discuss, but instead cogent, nusimus, right? And lucid, and arges, and this actually, those that shine forth, we could say, ones. So, proofs or demonstrations, they're not all equal. Some of them could be quite obscure, and you want to be judicious in which ones you're going to use. And he says, Here we can make a comparison with physicians. A physician who prescribes many drugs, literally a whole pharmacy, pharmakon, for his patients deserves less praise than the one who succeeds in helping them with a few. So the philosopher who teaches his pupils with the use of many proofs is less effective than the one who leads them to the desired goal with fewer, right? And we can also say something similar about the student. All students are not equal to each other in this respect. The pupil who has a quick intelligence is going to require fewer proofs. Now, isn't that an interesting thing to pause on? We often associate intelligence with having a comprehensive grasp on all the different ways you could possibly arrange something or explain something or articulate it or prove it, right? And Musonius is saying, actually, that's not a sign of intelligence. There's something else going on there. The smartest person will be able to figure things out fairly quickly. They will assent to the conclusion of the argument, right? They will get to the point in question, provided it be sound. Those who require proofs at every point, even when the matter is perfectly clear or demand to have demonstrated at the length things that could be explained briefly, he's going to say, these are stupid people. These are people, it's translated here, inept, so not good at what they're doing, and dull-witted. Right? So, what we want as ideals are teachers, philosophers, who can teach with, they may know a lot, but they don't need to talk about it all the time, and students who can get that. And then he's going to talk briefly about the gods. He says the gods, they know things. They don't need proof of anything. Why? Because things aren't unclear to them. We human beings, there's quite a few things that are unclear to us. That's why we need proofs or demonstrations. How do we do that? Well, we look at the things that are not plain or self-evident, asaphes, obscure, we could translate that as, and adelon. So interestingly, apodexis, delon, these are actually connected together, things that don't, you might say, demonstrate themselves. So that's when we need to do some sort of demonstration, and that's why we come up with proofs and arguments and things like that. And he's going to use an example here. So this is assuming a bit of Stoic philosophy. You may not find yourself in complete agreement with the premises that he's going to talk about. So take, for example, the proposition or statement that pleasure is not a good. And he says, well, most people at first glance are going to say, well, what are you talking about? Pleasure is a good. Feels good to me to have pleasure. Pleasure appeals to us as a good. However, he says, if we produce a demonstration where we begin from a generally accepted premise, something that most people should agree to, every good is desirable, and adding to it a second equally accepted premise that some pleasures are not desirable, we show that pleasure as a whole is not a good. So what are we doing there? He says, in general, we're proving the unknown or unrecognized by means of the known or recognized. And we could also do this with toil or pain. Ponos is the term used there. So toil means work that we have to do that we're not really interested in, like say homework or chores or whatever tasks it is that we don't feel like doing, and, they're disagreeable. It could also mean pain itself. Is that a bad thing, an evil thing? And he says, that toil is not an evil, is not on the face of it a persuasive proposition. You've got to be able to provide people some argument for this. So, some people might get this right away. Other people, it might take quite a bit. He says that starting from the known and accepted premise that every evil is something to be avoided, is every toil something to be avoided? No. Think, for example, about exercise. You may not feel like exercising, but you shouldn't avoid exercise. So at least some toils, some, pains are going to be not bad for us. He doesn't necessarily assert them as good, right? So he says this is the way that proof works. So what can we draw from that? Here's where he talks about different, let's say, capacities, right? Not everybody is equal in respect of grasping the matters that arguments or proofs are about. He says that when we consider that some people are quicker of wit and others duller, so we could say quickness to grasp, that's the quickness of wit, able to form connections in their mind, able to recognize patterns, able to see inferences where they're going. And environment plays a role as well. Some are reared in better environments, some are reared in worse, and we might pause on that and think about, well, what kind of environments would be better or worse? If you're raised by a bunch of people who, when they're encountering anything that doesn't click with their belief system, automatically get angry, that's a bad environment for understanding things. If you're raised as a people pleaser, that would be a bad environment, right? If you're raised by a bunch of so-called devil's advocates who want to question everything, contrarians, probably a bad environment. Some people are going to be lucky or fortunate in having parents, teachers who, are good people, make a good impression upon them. Others don't get that luck of the draw, you could say. So people vary in terms of this. Those who are inferior, he says, in character, ethos, or disposition, phuseos. Now, phuseos there is our natures, what it is that we get. Some of us, got smarter brains than others. And yes, environment can play a role, but not everybody is necessarily as quick in figuring things out. So those who are inferior in character or disposition, they're going to require more proofs. Musonius is not saying don't give those to them, just recognize that they're going to need them, right? And they'll also need more diligent attention to be led to understand what these teachings, actually, so that they can receive the teachings, quite literally, the dogmata. And I love this, be formed by them, tupotheni. So a tupos is like a mold, right, that we use for things. So our ideas, our dogmata, opinions, judgments, teachings, we are shaped, you could say, by those. And this is prefiguring something that he's going to talk about a little bit later on. The better off, the people who grasp things quickly, who had good upbringing, they will assent sunainoin and follow akuluthein much more easily than the others. And so he talks about, quicker and with greater ease, right? They can figure these things out. They don't need as many proofs. They can assent to sound reasoning, the things that are literally the things that are being said or reasoned out that are correct, orthos, more easily and more quickly, right? And he says, again, to use a comparison, we can understand this or recognize this if we know two young people, both of whom are the same age. One has been reared in luxury, and their body is weak, their spirit is weakened by soft living, and they also can have kind of a dull and torpid disposition. The other reared somewhat, now he's not endorsing the entire Spartan manner, somewhat in the Spartan manner, unaccustomed to luxury, practiced in self-restraint, which, by the way, is one of the virtues for the Stoics, ready to listen to good reasoning. Now we're going to teach both of them. We place them both in the position of students of a philosopher who is making arguments about stuff. So what are the arguments? Death, toil, poverty, are they really evils? The philosopher is saying, no, they're not evils. Not saying they're goods necessarily. For the Stoics, these are indifferent, right? And likewise, life, pleasure, and wealth, are they goods? No, they're not goods. He says that the one who is, well off will quickly and readily accept the argument as cogent. Now, this is very important and is relevant to himself. So he not only accepts it theoretically as, yeah, that's a good argument there, he also applies it to himself. The other one, it's a little bit of a different process. He says, the other one reluctantly, I don't really like this, slowly, fairly pried loose by, and it's literally 1,000, myrion arguments. Obviously, that's a metaphorical thing, because nobody's going to make 1,000 arguments or listen to them, will perhaps, in the end, give a sign of assent, epineusein, right? And that is placed in a sort of hypothetical thing. They may not actually agree to it, right? And it's going to take a lot to get them there. So these arguments are going to hit differently, as we say, by how these people are set up to receive them. And he's got a little discussion here about Cleanthes and the Spartan kid that I'm going to skip over for a moment. He says, to come back to the starting point, the arche of my discussion, it's a mistake for the teacher, if they're a real philosopher, to bring out a multitude of arguments, logoi, and proofs, apodeixes, for their students. What should they be doing instead? He says they should touch upon each one with just measure, try to penetrate the intellect of their hearer, and present arguments that won't be easily refuted. So, this is very interesting. He's saying, in effect here, you need to be attentive to your audience and tailor the work that you're going to do to them. And then there's something else that's even more important. You're making an additional argument or proof without laying it out theoretically, but doing it practically. He says that the teacher, the philosopher, needs to show the truth in what they're doing, the truth in what they say, by actually living it out. So he says he should show himself not only as one who utters words which are helpful, but as one who acts consistently with them. And then he says, as for the student, they have some jobs too. It's their duty to attend diligently to what is said. If you're not actually paying attention to what's being said, you can't complain if you don't understand it, right? And what they accept as truth, their efforts should not be directed towards learning numbers of proofs, but only the proofs that are plain and lucid. And they also have a requirement to try to live this out. Whatever precepts, dogmas, whatever teachings are enjoined upon them that they think are true, they need to follow them out in their daily life. And Musonius is going to conclude this by saying, that's how philosophy is actually any good to anybody. You have to add you have to have not only sound teaching, but you got to add behavior, conduct, how you act in the real world in harmony with it. So this is a very interesting set of reflections and bits of advice about how we ought to, as students, approach our teachers and the materials, and how as teachers we ought to be teaching our students.